our inner critic, that inner dialogue, isn't really you. It's the internalized voice of somebody that spoke to you like that, somebody that implied or provoked you to those emotional states or those beliefs. And what happens is that we hear them so often, then we internalize them. So you're so stupid, you're so lazy, you're so selfish becomes I'm so stupid, I'm so lazy, I'm so selfish. And we think that this is who we are and that this is how we're seeing ourselves, when in reality, it's almost like we've been brainwashed, right? To an extent, because in childhood, all we had was our subconscious online. So through repetition and emotion, those voices just become like tapes in the mind that are playing over and over without your conscious consent. But here's the thing, just because you learn that, right? It's nice. It's nice to learn that that's not you. And it helps you to kind of reframe it a little bit. I know in my case, when I learned that that voice was just an internalized voice and that that wasn't me and that I wasn't choosing necessarily to see myself like that, it alleviated a little bit. It was like nice to know that this isn't really who I am. So learning that is helpful. But I will say this, learning that alone is not enough to change it. It's not enough to change that harsh inner critic and kind of morph it into a compassionate dialogue. Because the truth is that that inner critic is there due to repetition and emotion that you endured that caused you to absorb that inner dialogue. And so the thing with those programs is that learning that they're faulty doesn't rewrite them. It's the same thing. Like if I have a computer and I learn that my computer has a virus and this is why it's malfunctioning, and I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense. It's nice to know now that I don't have to throw out my computer, that it's just a faulty virus that it has. I don't have to ditch the whole computer. But that knowledge isn't going to take that virus out. I have to do something to take that virus out. And that's the same thing with our inner dialogue. We have to change things. We now have to use repetition plus emotion to upgrade the subconscious. And that's the hard part. Because I know with myself, and I know with a lot of people that I work with, sometimes they get frustrated with themselves because they learn it, they get it, and they're like, why is this voice still coming on? Well, it's coming on because it's default. It's your default programming. It's there. It's been there for so long that you don't have to try to think that way. You don't have to try to have a harsh inner dialogue. It just happens automatically because it's been there so long. So the way we start working through it is kind of after the fact, so to speak. It's like we have to reverse engineer it. It's not learning and then all of a sudden it disappears. No, it's learning, it comes up because it's default, and then we change how we show up to that inner dialogue. So let's talk about some of the things that help and how you can change how you show up to it. One of the things that I actually got from the book is the book by Pete Walker. I think it's Complex PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. And he talks about the need to get angry at that voice. And the reason that that's helpful is because in childhood, when you were mistreated, when you were insulted and told those horrible things, you couldn't retaliate. You couldn't even say that hurt, especially if you had narcissistic parents. You couldn't say, that makes me sad, or I'm angry because you're treating me that way. No, but that anger and that pain was there in the body. And so what we do as children, when we can't fight or flight, we stifle and freeze. So we put all that emotion down. We don't respond back to our parents because it's not safe. But all that energy of that fight or flight isn't gone just because we're in freeze. It's underneath the freeze. And so part of being able to overcome the harsh inner critic is being able to get out of freeze so that we can respond with healthy, righteous anger, right? When somebody mistreats you, it is healthy to say, that's unacceptable. I'm not going to tolerate that kind of speech. if you're going to speak to me that way, this conversation is over. And so with our harsh inner critic, we can start doing that. One of the ways that we start working through that is, first of all, we have to hear it. We have to start becoming aware. If you're not aware of your harsh inner critic, it will run the show. It will stop you from doing things you love. It will scare you into submission. It will make you see only the negative in your life. And it will constantly steal your joy or pop your bubble, so to speak, and not allow you to enjoy the positives in life. So awareness is definitely the first thing. And then the next thing we want to do is to start responding differently. And this takes time because that internalized abuser's voice is waking up and causing you to feel the same emotions that you felt when they were abusing you. Right? So if they said, you're so stupid, you're so pathetic, and now you're saying, I'm so stupid, I'm so pathetic, guess what we're feeling? Shame. We're feeling these same emotional states. We're keeping ourselves in that without even realizing it. So again, that's automatic. When we first start noticing that voice, we're going to notice the voice, we're going to notice the emotion. And sometimes shifting out of that emotion is a bit challenging. So be patient with yourself. But if you can start noticing that voice and asking yourself, if you saw somebody saying that to a small child, what would you do? What would you say? How would you want to respond? If you saw somebody just going up to a child and saying, you're pathetic, I can't stand you. Or if that's hard for you to imagine, think of somebody you love. If you're a parent, think of your child. Somebody says to your child, you're pathetic, I can't stand you. I know as a mom, controlling yourself when somebody is hurting your child and refraining from protecting someone you love is so hard, almost nearly impossible. Well, that same righteous desire to protect that we would have for our children or a small child that we love, or even a stranger's child, we need to start giving to ourselves. That's going to help us to activate our fight response, a healthy fight response. Our fight response is not bad. Okay, fight response is necessary. It's what helps us to put down boundaries. It's what helps us to be assertive. So we want to activate the healthy fight response. The second thing you want to do is really soothe the pain that's underneath that anger. The reality is that when you were spoken to that way, that hurt. To have a parent, a child would do anything to please a parent. They are they just want to give love, right? And then to experience that rejection, and not just rejection, but abuse, that was painful. And that pain is still there if you had toxic parents. That pain was stifled again, right? So you want to soothe that and validate that it's there. So you validate the pain. And then the last step is give your brain a choice. Give your brain a choice. You acknowledge that that voice came up, that is the internalized voice of name whoever it's from. Oh, that's how my mom talked to me. That's how my dad talked to me. Nurture and validate the pain. And then the last step that's helpful with overcoming the harsh inner critic is to bring yourself into an empowered place inside. And so we can do that with a bridging statement like, even though this voice came up, even though the harsh inner critic is still here, I'm so glad I'm learning to stand up for myself. I'm so glad that I'm raising the bar with how I treat myself. I'm so glad that I'm learning to see myself as I really am. And so now you've worked through what's going on with the harsh inner critic instead of trying to just force yourself to have a different way of being, or without trying to ignore or deny what's going on. You're working through it. It does take time. It takes time to master. So be patient with yourself. No one learns these tips and practices them perfectly. It's not about being perfect. It's about changing how you treat you. It's bad enough. It's bad enough to have gone through a toxic relationship, an abusive relationship from someone you expected to love you and have your back, right? That's bad enough. But we don't want to continue the abuse due to the internalized voice of the abuser. We want to start taking that harsh inner critic and shaping it and remolding it into a compassionate dialogue, which is what your younger self deserved in the first place. So I hope these tips help. Let me know in the comments below if they do. And then always remember that if you're struggling to shift, if you're struggling to make the changes that can help you to break out of complex PTSD and you're tired of doing it alone, then make sure you check out Thrivers School of Transformation, because we meet live on Zoom. And each month we take a piece of the healing journey and we deep dive into it, and we do it together with people from all over the world. So if that's something you think could be helpful for you, make sure you check it out in the links below.